The sound of the music intensified the moment I re-entered, or perhaps everything simply felt amplified, as if the aged timbers were creaking with a concealed secret. I recall wiping my hands on my trousers. I had just come inside from the garden, where I'd received a call from my cousin. A familiar discussion about selling Grandma's apartment and whether I had agreed to it. I told him I'd contemplate it. I didn't reveal I was at a gathering. I didn't mention that for the past 10 minutes, I'd been fighting the urge to be sick. Not due to the call, but because of what I suspected was unfolding while I was outside. I persuaded myself I was being irrational. Then I opened the incorrect door. It was meant to lead to the corridor for the restroom. That's what I told myself. I wasn't intruding. I wasn't monitoring her. I merely misremembered the arrangement. That's what I desired to accept. The door swung open effortlessly, silently, too silently. And there she was, not in a bedroom, not in a wardrobe, but in a utility room. Lights off. Only the hallway's glow outlining her form and his. I didn't witness anything explicit, but I didn't need to. Her frame was pressed against his. His palm was on her spine, her fingers curled around his shirt like she'd practiced it 100 times, like conditioned behavior. I didn't stir. I didn't breathe. I blinked, and then they noticed me. She gasped. He took a step back. The quiet between the three of us lingered for an eternity. Aurora didn't utter my name. She didn't rush over. She simply stared. Her lips parted as if she were about to concoct a justification for being there. But nothing emerged. I closed the door quietly. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I didn't create a disturbance. I proceeded through the food preparation area. Someone handed me a disposable glass of fruity juice and asked, "You all right, dude?" I nodded. Then I exited through the main entrance, sat in my vehicle, and switched off my device. I have no memory of the journey back. I recall the radiance of scarlet rear lights. I recall gripping the steering equipment so tightly my fingers clicked. I remember seeing her name illuminate my device twice before it powered down. I didn't weep. Not then. I simply sat in the approach to our house for hours, observing shadows shift behind the curtains, wondering which version of her I'd be returning to, and whether she'd even bother to fabricate. She arrived just after 1:00 a.m. I detected her heels striking against the flooring in the entrance. That intentional rhythm she always exhibited when preparing for something, like entering a conference or navigating through an airport, or engaging in a disagreement she intended to conquer. I was on the sofa, lights off, a blanket over my lap as if I'd dozed off watching entertainment, though I hadn't switched the television on at all. I'd simply been sitting in the darkness, replaying the image of her in that utility room like a clip caught on replay. She didn't observe me initially. I observed her form past the hallway reflection, her hand adjusting her locks as if she were assessing her appearance, not alarmed, not even remorseful, simply composed. And then she observed me. She froze, one heel slightly elevated, as if her next movement would either be toward me or away, depending on what I conveyed. But I didn't speak. I simply observed her, awaiting which version of her I was about to receive. She spoke my name like a question, as if uncertain I was real. Then she added something about attempting to locate me at the gathering, how I had simply disappeared, and she assumed I'd departed early. Her voice was steady, too steady, practiced, as if she'd utilized the journey home to rehearse. I inquired calmly who the man was. She blinked. "What man?" I didn't respond. I simply tilted my head, and for a moment something flickered across her expression. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or fear. It was like her brain clicked into a different gear, as if she'd suddenly recalled there had been a door and someone had opened it. She sat slowly on the edge of the chair opposite me. Not beside me, not even close. She set her purse on the ground as if it were a delicate item between us and exhaled through her nose. I didn't react. She uttered that expression. It was so small, so carefully selected, that it induced a feeling of madness within me. Not It's not what you perceive, not I apologize, not even allow me to clarify. Simply four expressions that offered no truth, no deceit, only obscurity. She didn't deny she was in that room. She didn't inquire what I witnessed. She simply relied on the one technicality that might permit her to sleep more peacefully. I didn't react. I inquired how long she'd known him. She paused. Too long, then said, "He's simply someone Julian associates with. We were conversing about the lighting in the hallway, and the lights were off." I interrupted. Another quiet, another falsehood, collapsing. That's when she stood abruptly, as if she'd suddenly recalled she had something simmering, except there was nothing. She simply began pacing, massaging her temples, repeating my name again and again, as if that would somehow reset the conversation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't weep. I didn't accuse her of anything she hadn't already conceded with her nonverbal communication. I simply asked the one inquiry I was afraid to know the answer to. Do you feel affection for him? She ceased moving. She didn't glance at me. She didn't say no. Instead, she whispered something so quietly I wasn't even certain I heard correctly. I don't know how to respond to that. And that was all. She ascended the stairs slowly, abandoning me in the room, surrounded by shadows and unresolved inquiries. I detected the bedroom door closing. I waited for it to lock, but it didn't. I remained on the sofa the remainder of the night, blanket over me, eyes wide, attempting to decipher whether this was the commencement of something fracturing or the moment I realized it already had. The following morning, the house was too quiet. Not peacefully quiet, but that sort of quiet that swells after a disagreement you didn't have. I heard her moving upstairs, heard the shower operating longer than usual, but she didn't descend until after I'd already completed my coffee. I sat at the table, acting to scroll through news on my device, but I couldn't cease observing the stairwell. When she finally descended, she appeared polished. Too polished for a Sunday, locks perfected, makeup subtle, but deliberate. She was dressed in the blouse she typically reserved for professional introductions, not casual meals, not a recovery day, not the morning after whatever transpired last night. She opened the refrigerator, acting not to acknowledge I was observing her. "Would you like anything? I was considering making eggs." That's when I realized how unreal everything had become. She was offering me eggs as if nothing had occurred, as if our union hadn't shifted slightly overnight, as if she hadn't whispered, "I don't know how to respond to that." When I asked if she felt affection for someone else, I informed her I wasn't hungry. I conveyed it too bluntly. She noticed. I could perceive it in how her shoulders tensed before she reverted to the refrigerator. Then she commenced speaking rapidly, disconnectedly, as if she'd planned a dialogue in front of the mirror, but had forgotten the core. "I believe perhaps we should take some distance. Just a few days, not like a split. Just a reset. I'll go remain with Abigail. Perhaps you can consider—" "And I can reset what?" I asked. She blinked. "I mean, what are we resetting? If nothing transpired, why do we require a reset?" That silenced her. Her mouth opened, then closed. She pressed her lips together and exhaled through her nose. "I think we both realize that something's been amiss for a while," she said, gazing at the surface instead of at me. "You've been distant. You've been, I don't know, not engaged." It landed like a hit. I wasn't prepared for it, because it was accurate. I had been distant. Not because I didn't care, but because for months I'd been feeling like a visitor in my own union. Like I was always trailing behind a dialogue I didn't know had begun. But hearing her employ it now as her justification was like being blamed for not hydrating a plant after she'd already removed it from the soil. I didn't contest. I lacked the energy. I simply nodded and said, "All right." She filled a carrier in 20 minutes, didn't weep, didn't kiss me, simply grasped her keys and said she'd text me. The door closed behind her, and I stood in the room, gazing at the indentation in the sofa cushion where she used to sit every night, knees curled, remote in one hand, and hot drink in the other. And that's when I began contemplating all the moments I hadn't understood. The late evening showers after alleged friend meetings, the sudden guilt when I surprised her at work with a beverage, and she insisted on meeting me in the vehicle park, the manner in which she began locking her device screen even when she was simply walking to the bathroom. It wasn't hindsight anymore. It was a pattern, and I began following it. I didn't examine her device. I couldn't. I still believed there was some boundary I hadn't yet crossed. But I accomplished something else. I proceeded to her desktop above, the one we employed less and less since she acquired her tablet, and checked the internet history. I wasn't seeking anything. I was simply seeking, and that's when I observed it. An open email tab still logged into her personal account. The subject heading of the most recent communication simply stated, "Last night." The preview stated, "I can still smell you on my fingers." I didn't click it. I closed the window. I proceeded to the bathroom and became sick. And when I observed myself in the reflection, something within me finally fractured because it wasn't about the infidelity anymore. It was about how long she'd ceased being mine and how long I'd been acting not to perceive it. I couldn't cease rereading that email subject heading. Even though I hadn't clicked on it, "I can still smell you on my fingers." It played in my thoughts on repeat, like a haunting mantra, each repetition pulling me further from the man I believed I was, and closer to someone I didn't recognize, someone vacant. My hands were shaking when I stepped away from the writing surface. I didn't even log her out. I simply exited the area as if I'd stepped on an explosive device and was hoping if I didn't move too rapidly, I wouldn't disintegrate. I didn't rest that night. I didn't eat either. I simply sat in our bed surrounded by supports that still smelled like her cleanser, attempting to piece together what I'd missed. How many deceits did she wrap in smiles? How many nights had I kissed her cheek after she arrived home late without ever pondering what or who she had been associating with? The following morning, I received a communication. Not from her, from Abigail. "Hey, is everything all right? Aurora mentioned she was staying with me, but never appeared." I stared at the screen. My digestion system plummeted. I reread it simply to ensure I wasn't misinterpreting. But no, it was apparent. Aurora had deceived again. She informed me she was going to Abigail's. Abigail, her closest companion since education. The same Abigail who would have covered for her in the past without even questioning. But now she was inquiring where Aurora was. I didn't reply. I simply rose, proceeded back to the technology, and this time I opened the communication. It was short, less than a paragraph. "I can still smell you on my fingers. That dress was dangerous. I'm still preoccupied considering the manner in which you lean back on the cleanser. I realize we mentioned no more after this, but you were correct. You're distinct when you're with me. I don't care what he suspects. I desire you again." There was no designation, no sign-off, but I didn't require one. I could still visualize him. The man in the corridor, navy sweater, the one she mentioned, she barely knew. I felt unwell again, but this time I didn't run to the bathroom. I simply sat on the floor, back against the partition, staring at the expressions until the screen dimmed and went dark. Even then, I kept staring as if they'd burn their manner into the partition. The disloyalty wasn't simply the physical behavior, it was the simplicity of it, the convenience in her quiet, the manner in which she had permitted me to embrace her that morning after Julian's gathering and ask if she was tired, and she'd stated, "Yeah, but it was fun," like nothing had occurred. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't hesitated. That was the component that destroyed me. Later that afternoon, I detected a vehicle door closing outside. I peered through the window, and there she was, Aurora, approaching the walkway as if she'd simply departed to grasp groceries. Locks tied, outerwear on, device in one hand. Usual. Too usual. I didn't know if she was approaching to clarify or to pretend again, and in that moment, I wasn't certain which would injure more. She opened the entrance and froze when she observed me standing in the corridor. She didn't smile. She didn't seem surprised. She simply exhaled. "I assume you witnessed it," she stated. I didn't respond. She dropped her keys in the container near the entrance as if this were any other Thursday. "It didn't signify anything," she added, still not meeting my eyes. I almost laughed. That's how absurd it was. A phrase like that after 11 years of union diminished to a shrug, and "it didn't signify anything." I inquired how long it had been unfolding. She stated, "A few months." I inquired how many times. She didn't respond. Instead, she proceeded into the cooking area, opened the refrigerator, and grasped a container of liquid as if her thirst mattered, as if I hadn't expended the past 24 hours dismantling everything I believed was real. "You don't have to make this into some huge ordeal," she stated from behind the surface. I was feeling disconnected. "You've been checked out for months, Silas. We rarely converse. We haven't been close I don't even recall. You ceased appearing." I desired to contest. I desired to shout that I had been present even when I felt invisible. I had appeared to her professional meals, to her parents' celebration when I was unwell, to every moment she required me. I had to cease appearing in the precise manner she desired, and for that, I was now a recollection she was rewriting to suit her guilt. She consumed her liquid, wiped her mouth, and finally glanced at me. "I'm not conveying I was correct," she stated, "but I wasn't happy, and I don't assume you were, either." That was the moment I realized she'd already made calm with it. The disloyalty, the deceits, the end. She had processed it all long before I even knew I had something to lament. "I didn't depart the gathering early," she finally conceded. "I remained with him after you departed. We proceeded back to his residence. I assumed you knew." I stared at her, unable to breathe. "I assumed you abandoned me," she added quietly. Those expressions hit harder than any confession, because in her thoughts I had abandoned first, not physically but emotionally. And that to her justified everything. She wasn't remorseful. She was rewriting the narrative. And I realized then she wasn't simply cheating on me. She was already absent. It had been 2 days since Aurora's so-called confession. She didn't arrive home that night, and I didn't inquire where she proceeded. I couldn't. I didn't desire to picture her somewhere else, wearing one of the outer garments I purchased her, laughing at jokes that weren't mine, permitting another man to believe she was free. The quiet in the residence had grown so loud it felt like a presence, the kind that watches you from a corner of the room and reminds you precisely what you forfeited, even when you're attempting to forget. I was halfway through discarding a compartment of invoices and useless batteries when I received a telephone from an unknown number. I typically permit those to go to messaging, but I answered this one. The voice on the other end was male, calm, measured. He stated my designation as if he knew me. "Silas, I'm remorseful to contact you like this, but we require to converse, and I don't assume your spouse desires you to hear what I have to convey." My throat went dry. "Who is this?" I asked, though I wasn't certain I desired the answer. "My designation's Ezra. He paused. "I'm her colleague. Well, I was until last week." That pause, it informed me everything I required to know before he even entered the details. "I don't desire to create difficulties," he continued, "but I also don't believe it's accurate that you're being deceived about how far behaviors truly proceeded." Oh. I sat down at the edge of the bed, pulse racing. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "It wasn't simply that individual from the gathering, Silas. She was associating with someone else too, at work before him. I only discovered because she employed my writing surface one day and forgot to log out of her email. I didn't go seeking, I assure you, but what I observed, dude..." My ears were ringing. "She sent images," he he stated carefully, as if he were attempting to safeguard me from the expression without denying its existence. To someone in a distinct branch. It seemed like it had been unfolding for a while, a few months, perhaps more. They were emailing from a private account, but it linked to the internal network. That's how HR discovered. HR? Yeah, someone else flagged it. That's why she resigned last week. She informed individuals she was drained, but she was about to be placed on monitoring. They gave her the option to quit. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She hadn't simply lied to me. She'd lied to everyone. Her exit from the organization was a cover, a carefully staged behavior to maintain the truth sealed, and she never stated a word. Not when she departed. Not when she informed me she required distance. She'd been concealing layers of disloyalty so deep that even her false explanations had false explanations. "Why are you informing me this?" I asked barely above a whisper. Ezra paused again. "Because you appear like a decent individual the one time I met you, and you deserve superior to half a narrative. Also, I believe she's intending to sell the residence." My head jerked up. What? She's been emailing someone about cash buyer's off-market sale. Mentioned she desired to be out by the end of next month. I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. This wasn't simply an affair. This was an exit strategy. I had been lamenting a union while she was negotiating how to unload our home like it was a worn vehicle. No discussion, no confrontation, no forewarning. She was going to take what she desired, disappear, and abandon me in the ashes, blindsided, dazed, and without even the courtesy of farewell. I thanked him. I don't even recall what I stated. My mouth was operating, but my thoughts had departed the area. After we disconnected, I sat in the darkness, gazing at the main entrance. I half anticipated her to walk through it, smiling as if nothing had occurred, inquiring if I desired to grasp Asian cuisine or observe something trivial on the entertainment service. She was still capable of pretending. That was her gift, her survival tactic, and I was weary of being the one deceived by it. I opened my portable computer. I proceeded through every shared document, every financial login, every folder that might provide me a hint about what else she was concealing. And that's when I observed it. A scanned document labeled Purchase Agreement Draft. It was dated 2 weeks ago. She'd already met with a buyer. Not only that, she'd listed herself as the single owner. My designation wasn't even on the documentation. And that's when it struck me. She wasn't attempting to sell the residence. She was attempting to erase me from it entirely. It's a strange occurrence, realizing your designation's been erased. I sat there gazing at the draft sale agreement, with my mouth open, the radiance of the portable computer screen reflecting off my glasses as if it were attempting to blind me from observing the truth. But I observed it in bold letters. Single owner, Aurora M. Emer. My designation was nowhere, not even a mention as a cosigner. It was like I had never existed in this residence, the residence I coded with my own hands, the residence where we debated over storage colors, the residence where I learned to cook on the entertainment platform simply so we could cease living on nourishment. It was our home, and she decided it was hers. The disloyalty wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't a blade. It was something slower now, like concrete solidifying around my ribs, rendering it difficult to breathe. She planned every movement. The fake work drama, the "I simply require a reset" dialogue, even the night she permitted me to observe her in that utility room. I began pondering if that had been intentional too, if I'd been permitted to catch her, if that was the scene she staged so she could portray me as the unstable one when it all disintegrated. I didn't know where she was. I didn't care anymore. I simply required to know how far she'd taken it. So, I accomplished something I never believed I would. I proceeded into the storage area. It was truly more like a second garret, a weird entrance behind the cloth storage we never employed. When we transitioned in, it was crammed with junk from the preceding owner. Yellowing newspapers, fractured picture frames, a taxidermized feline that nearly gave me a cardiac arrest. We sealed it off years ago, agreed it was too much inconvenience. But a few weeks back, I observed the entrance had been unlocked, simply barely a half-inch open. I informed myself it was nothing. But now I wasn't certain. I pulled the entrance open. The atmosphere smelled stale, like dust and something faintly chemical. I flicked the light control. A single exposed light buzzed overhead, and that's when I observed them. 3 plastic bins pushed into the far corner, each with a piece of masking adhesive labeled in Aurora's writing. They stated, "Old photographs, donor invoices, backup docs." It was the third one that caught me. I dragged it out into the hallway and opened it. Inside were file folders, some of them marked with dates, others with codes I didn't understand. But then I observed it. A package labeled in small, precise writing, SW. Plan B, do not employ unless forced. SW. My initials. My digestion system turned. My hands were trembling when I opened it. Inside were duplicates of documents, rental applications under her designation only, email prints with subject headings like temporary relocation options, a draft communication to a law company requesting a discussion regarding emergency split proceedings and asset distribution in cases of sudden emotional distress. There was even a written communication, not in her writing, not signed, but written as if from me, stating I'd voluntarily vacated the premises and had no further authorized claim to shared asset. I had never written that communication, but it was dated 3 months ago. She had planned for my exit before I even knew we had a difficulty. She was preparing to erase me, not simply from her existence, but from paper, from record, from the proof of ever having been there. And worst of all, she had accomplished it coldly, like she'd accomplished this before. That thought sat with me in a manner I didn't anticipate, had she? I hadn't known much about Aurora before we met. She transferred occupations from another location. She didn't converse much about past relationships, mentioned they were chaotic, and she preferred to gaze forward, not back. I respected that. I trusted it. But now I was questioning everything. Every narrative she informed me, every bad former partner she once rolled her eyes about, every crazy roommate that overreacted. What if I hadn't been her first clean exit? What if I was simply the next designation on her list? I sat in that hallway, surrounded by containers, my legs numb, my hands still buried in documents that felt like they'd been designed by a stranger. And then, just when I thought I'd reached the bottom, I detected a sound, a knock, not on the main entrance, on the vehicle park entrance. It was soft, though, one knock, then quiet. I breathed out. It came again. One knock, long pause, one more. I stood slowly, pulse pounding, and proceeded down the stairs toward the entrance that led to the vehicle park. I opened it simply a fracture, and what I observed there made me stumble back in shock. It wasn't Aurora. It was a teenage girl saturated from the downpour, holding a bag and whispering the last designation I hadn't heard since Aurora's curriculum. "Are you Silas Wan? I believe I'm your daughter." She stood there drenched from head to toe, her cheeks crimson from the wind, her breath shallow and anxious. The bag was frayed at the seams, and her fingers gripped the strap as if it were her last anchor in the environment. She didn't appear more than 15, perhaps 16, but with that vacant gaze in her eyes, you only acquire when you've learned too much too soon. I think I'm your daughter," she stated again, voice trembling. "I'm remorseful if this is incorrect." I couldn't speak. I simply stood there in the dim radiance of the open vehicle park, my pulse pounding in a manner that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with acknowledgement. Because the more I gazed at her, the more I observed the tiniest, faintest echoes. The curve of her nose, the nervous tilt of her eyebrows, the same fidgety manner I used to clasp my hands when I was a youngster. I stepped back, wordlessly gesturing for her to come inside. She did, cautiously. Her footwear left watery imprints across the floor, But she didn't seem to observe. She simply gazed around the residence as if it were a location she'd only ever envisioned. Once she was seated on the edge of the sofa and wrapped in a towel, I finally located my voice. "What's your designation?" I asked. "Delilah," she stated. I've only ever been Delilah." "And how do you know me?" She gazed away for a second, then reached into her carrier and pulled out a stack of papers, old emails, screenshots, and what resembled a record. I took them in quiet. The record stopped me cold. Father, Silas W. Juan. Mother, Aurora Emmer, Aurora's maiden designation. My hand shook as I flipped through the remainder. Emails between Aurora and someone listed only as J. It resembled correspondence from over a decade ago, discussions about care, finances, arrangements, journey restrictions. None of it made sense initially until I reached one specific expression from Aurora's reply. "You stated you didn't desire him involved. You made your selection. If that shifts, I'll accomplish what's superior for her, but don't anticipate me to drag him back into existence he didn't desire." It struck me like a train. Aurora had a child before she met me, and she informed the father, someone I'd never heard of, that I didn't desire anything to do with the infant. She had employed my designation, a deception not to just anyone, but to her own child, to this girl, Delilah. I gazed up at her, stunned. "Delilah, where have you been residing?" She hesitated. "Mostly with a companion of hers, but I ran away. She was leaving. I located this container in her cabinet with letters and files. She never informed me about you, but she stated your designation once years ago when she believed I was resting. I remembered it. When I located all that material, I looked you up. I took the bus here. I didn't know what else to accomplish." My throat tightened. "Did she injure you?" "No," she stated rapidly, "but she didn't desire me anymore. I think she was attempting to send me to remain with someone else permanently, somewhere out of state. She stated she required a new commencement." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Aurora had proceeded so far beyond disloyalty. It was like she'd burned the map entirely. She had erased an entire existence she'd brought into the environment, not simply from me, but from Delilah. And now, when it no longer served her, she was prepared to discard her like she had everything else. That night, I permitted Delilah to remain in the visitor room. I made her a meal. We didn't converse much after that, but when I passed by her entrance later, I observed the light was still on, and she was weeping. Not loudly, simply enough for the burden of it to bleed through the quiet. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not the kind of fury I felt with Aurora. Something steadier. Something that felt a lot like intention. For the first time in weeks, perhaps years, I knew precisely what I required to accomplish. That night, I barely rested. I sat at the cooking area writing surface long after the lights were out. Long after Delilah had curled in the visitor bed with one of my old outer garments as a blanket, I simply sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the hallway clock, pondering how many truths I'd accepted without ever questioning. For 11 years, I'd built an existence with a woman who had planned her exit long before I knew there was even a fracture in the groundwork. But somehow, in the middle of all that loss, someone else had located me, and this time, I wasn't going to gaze away. The following morning, I contacted an authorized representative, not to initiate a battle with Aurora, not to get even, simply to safeguard what was mine. I had the documents, the paper pathway, and now I had intention. It turned out that the residence title had been altered behind my back, but not finalized. She required my sign to sell, which explained the sudden charm, the recent apologies, the bizarre push to reset. That entrance was now closed permanently. I filed a claim to freeze the sale, had the documentation corrected, and added protection to my accounts. I also gave Delilah's designation to my authorized representative, not to force anything, but to ensure that if she desired protection, guidance, or even simply a location to remain, she'd have it officially. 2 days later, Aurora appeared. She didn't knock. She simply walked in like she still had keys to everything, like she still possessed the quiet between us. But the moment she observed Delilah sitting at the table, consuming cereals and smiling faintly in my direction, something shifted in her expression. She didn't say hello, she didn't say anything at all. She simply stood there in the doorway, blinking as if she had simply observed a spirit from an existence she tried to bury. "I informed you to remain with Mila," she stated to Delilah. "I didn't desire to," Delilah replied simply. "I desired to locate my father." Aurora turned to me then. No rage, no guilt, simply cold disbelief. "You brought her here." "No," I said. "She located me." And for the first time since this entire nightmare started, I observed something shatter behind her eyes. Not regret, not sorrow, simply the realization that this time the handwriting wasn't hers to control. She couldn't twist this, couldn't rewrite it. The truth had caught up to her, and it had come home saturated in rain, carrying a bag and a fractured history. Aurora didn't remain long. She didn't apologize. She didn't battle. She simply departed. And this time, when the entrance closed behind her, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like liberation. The weeks that followed were quiet, but healing in a manner I hadn't anticipated. Delilah remained. She wasn't prepared to designate me father, and I didn't push her, but she liked the manner I made grilled cheese, and she asked me inquiries about behaviors I thought no one ever noticed, like the photographs I'd taken in education, or the sketches I never hung up. One evening I located her sketching in the visitor room. I didn't interrupt. I simply stood there for a moment and observed her, a pencil in her hand, one leg tucked beneath her, eyes narrowed in concentration. And I thought, she's going to be all right. We both are. I still acquire days where I feel vacant. Days when I locate a shirt Aurora left in the cabinet or hear a track that reminds me of a journey we took when we still believed in each other. But those moments pass. They always do. And in their location, something superior is growing. Not flashy, not rapid, simply honest. Some nights Delilah and I sit on the porch and say nothing at all. And it's in that quiet I've started to feel whole again. Not because everything turned out the manner I planned, but because sometimes the unexpected becomes the very behavior that saves you. She came to my entrance in the middle of the rain with nothing but a designation and a question. And without knowing it, she gave me back my existence.